The African Development Bank is cautiously optimistic that Africa will weather the storm triggered by the current conflict in Ukraine. The continent is facing the possibility of food insecurity. The bank is hosting its annual meeting in the Ghanaian capital, Accra. They are hoping to find concrete plans. Khayelihle Khumalo has more on the story.
It is day one of the African Development Bank Group's conference right here in the Ghanaian capital. A lot of issues really being explored, especially around the looming food crisis that is facing the continent. And joining us now, of course, is one of the vice president for the bank. So, sir, thank you so much indeed for your time. So I suppose everyone is very frightened about this looming food crisis, but to hear the assurance from the bank that you'll do everything possible to try and avert this particular crisis.
Now, as the president of the bank has already said, we have already put together a facility of $1.5 billion to support Africa with technologies for agricultural transformation on the continent. So we are tackling the food crisis with a program to boost food production across the continent. So providing seeds, providing fertilizers and relevant technologies that will ensure that Africa can have drought-resistant varieties and be able to boost food output and productivity across the continent to avert the crisis.
And obviously, largely because of the conflict in Ukraine between Russia and Ukraine itself. And all of this happens as we're looking forward to reviving the economies in light of the devastating period due to COVID-19. So you have all these concurrent crises, but also another very important element will have to be around the just transition when it comes to energy, a very important element in this regard.
Now, just energy transitions is very crucial for Africa because, as you see, Africa is the most vulnerable region in the world to climate change and the most climate unready. We don't have the technologies, we don't have the capacity, we don't have the financing to be able to meet the challenge of adaptation and mitigation. But Africa has contributed the least. Just below 3% of the global emissions is coming from this continent, but Africa is suffering most from the impacts of climate change. We lose about 5 to 15% of our GDP growth to climate change. So it is very important that Africa considers this issue and how we triangulate dealing with climate change to reduce emissions, but also having the energy systems that will give us the energy stability that allows Africa to industrialize and have structural transformation so that we can grow food, grow our industries, create jobs for youth and women, and be able to transition to a higher level of technical efficiency that will allow us to decouple from CO2 emissions as we grow our economies.
And a very interesting point by the president when you spoke about financing these projects, but also emphasizing that if you do get the concessional loan, there won't be any debt that you'll incur, something that is very crucial. But maybe just before I let you go, Mr. Vice President, another very important issue, of course, will be we're heading to the Egyptian COP27. Do you think Africa will have a common position in terms of making sure that climate change really gets that necessary attention?
The African group of negotiators is working really very hard, and the bank is supporting them. And as the president also said, led by President Sisi, Egypt is working very hard in order to transform all the promises and all the conversations that has happened in the past 27 years on dealing with climate change to action. And one of that key action is the developed countries meeting the commitment they've made to provide about $100 billion to developing countries to address the climate change impacts. Now, Africa, in terms of climate finance, is being shortchanged because we've not been receiving enough of climate finance flows into the continent to address the challenge. We're receiving only about $18.3 billion annually, and what we need is up to $118 billion every year. In order to achieve the nationally determined contributions of the continent, we need up to $1.6 trillion. So there's a huge financing gap of up to $127 billion US dollars annually up to 2030. So there's huge financing needs required there. And you know, many of the African countries are facing other forms of fragility. And these countries are the group of countries that the concessional window of the bank called the African Development Fund supports. We call them ADF countries. So, and the bank is in conversation now with our partners and donor communities, donor countries for replenishment of that fund. So a huge replenishment of that fund will allow the bank to be able to leverage it more to provide support to these countries that are facing multiple crises: inflation, food price increases, energy price increases, and challenges that are there, some of which are exogenous, meaning it's not caused by the countries, and the countries can really not do so much about it.